She was handed a dress. Then a whole country lost its mind. There is a piece of blue fabric hanging in a photo studio right now that costs $140, weighs almost nothing, and has somehow become the single most talked about object in an entire nation this week. Not a president, not a typhoon, not a viral scandal. Tennis dress. And by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why 114 million people, plus another 10 million scattered across every time zone on Earth, looked at that dress and collectively decided it belonged to them. But here's the twist nobody wants to say out loud. The company that made it never called it hers. Not officially. Not on the label. And that gap between what a corporation prints on a tag and what a country decides to believe is where this entire story actually lives. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to know something most of the people posting about this dress right now don't know. The real story behind the color, the real story behind the marketing, and the real story about what happened to the young woman wearing it less than 48 hours ago. A story that almost nobody is talking about, and one that changes everything about how you should feel walking into her next tournament. Before we go further, if you care about tennis stories that go deeper than the highlight reel, hit subscribe now, because this one has layers, and I promise you the ending is not what you think. The dress nobody can stop screenshotting. Let's start with the object itself, because the details matter more than you'd expect. It's called the NikeCourt Slam women's tennis dress, and it retails for $140. The color is officially named Old Royal, a deep, saturated blue with black and white trim running along the edges. The design leans hard into a basketball-inspired look. Large hole mesh panels cut into the sides and back, giving it a fishnet-style texture that's meant to keep the athlete cool under stadium lights. It's built with a racerback cut designed to sit cleanly under a sports bra, with striped tape finishing the trim. Nike's own product copy leans into an aggressive, competitive tone, essentially promising the wearer will feel like she's already won before she's even stepped on the court. That's the technical description. Here's the human one. The moment photos of this dress hit the internet, Filipino social media did not treat it like merchandise. They treated it like a flag. Because that shade of blue, Old Royal, sits remarkably close to the official blue used in the Philippine flag since it was formalized in the country's flag and heraldic code. Nobody at Nike has confirmed, on record, that the shade was chosen with that in mind. It's part of a wider collection. Other athletes are wearing pieces from the same basketball-inspired line. But try telling that to a group chat in Toronto, or Dubai, or Los Angeles, where screenshots of this dress have been circulating for days with captions that all say some version of the same thing. This one's ours. And that's the real tension we're going to sit inside for the next 20-some minutes. Not whether the dress is custom. We'll get to that. The real question is bigger. What happens when a country decides an object means something, whether or not the company that made it agrees? Who is wearing it and why right now? So who is this dress actually built around? Her name is Alexandra Eala. Everyone calls her Alex. She's 21 years old, she's from the Philippines, and as of the start of August, she made history by becoming the first Filipina to ever crack the WTA's top 20 singles rankings. To understand why a single dress reveal turned into a cultural moment, you need to rewind about 10 days and watch what she actually did to earn that ranking, because this is not a story about hype. This is a story about receipts. At the start of August, Eala won the DC Open in Washington, a WTA 500 event, and it wasn't a lucky run. Over the course of that tournament, she beat Zhang Qinwen, Leylah Fernandez, Alina Svitolina, and four-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka, before closing it out in the final against world number 3 Jessica Pegula, winning in 3 sets after the match had been interrupted and pushed to a second day by rain. That win gave her the first WTA Tour singles title of her career, and it was enough to catapult her from 28th in the world all the way up to 20th. A new career high, and a milestone no Filipina had ever reached before her. Let that sink in for a second. For wins over major, established top-flight opponents, back-to-back-to-back-to-back, capped off with a win over a top 3 seed in the final. That's not a fluke draw. That's one of the more dominant single tournament runs anyone on tour produced this year. So when Nike unveiled her US Open dress just days after that title, the timing wasn't random. It landed in the same week she debuted in the top 20. It landed roughly 2 weeks before her return to Arthur Ashe Stadium for the US Open, which begins on August 23rd. Companies don't stumble into windows like that. They build campaigns around them. The marketing vacuum nobody's talking about. Here's the part of the story that almost never makes it into the viral posts, and it's the piece that actually explains why Nike is leaning so hard into Eala right now. On the women's side, Nike's roster of true signature tennis athletes, players with their own dedicated product lines, the way Naomi Osaka has hers, is thin. Osaka remains one of the very few active headline names carrying that kind of individualized deal for Nike in tennis. Meanwhile, rival brands have been aggressively signing up rising stars and building splashy campaigns around them. For a company that once dressed some of the most dominant names in the sport's history, that's a competitive gap worth closing. Into that gap walks a 21-year-old from Quezon City who just beat 4 ranked, recognizable opponents in a row to win her first title, who's carrying a rags-to-ranking story that translates instantly across a dozen languages, and who has a diaspora of 10 million people primed to turn any piece of merchandise into a cultural event. If you were sitting in a Nike marketing meeting, you would do exactly what they did. You put a dress on her and you watch what the internet does with it. And to be clear, that is not some shady conspiracy. That's just what marketing is. Nike isn't hiding it. They're not claiming this is a personalized signature line built exclusively for her. Multiple outlets covering the reveal have noted that this same silhouette, in variations of the same basketball-inspired collection, is showing up on other Nike athletes at the tournament too, including a related design worn by world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka, which has drawn its own share of mixed reactions online for its even more aggressive mesh cutouts. So here's where honesty has to enter the conversation. If you've seen this dress described online as custom, made just for her, or her own signature kit, that's not quite accurate. It's a shared design from a broader collection, released through the athlete most likely to make it culturally explosive. That's a very different thing than a signature line. And the difference matters because it tells you exactly how this story is going to keep unfolding. What custom actually looked like and why it matters. Now here's a detail that I think genuinely changes how you should read this whole situation, and it's something most coverage has buried. Nike has, in fact, already done real custom work for Alex Eala, just not this dress. Last year, tied to her Vogue Philippines cover, Nike released a small limited edition capsule collection called In Full Bloom. It was designed by Manila-based artist Georgina Camus and featured the sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, rendered in a stylized design set against a tennis court background. The collection included a t-shirt, a cap, a tote bag, and notably, a hair tie decorated with the sampaguita motif that Eala herself wore heading into a Grand Slam appearance. That capsule was genuinely personal. It wasn't built for mass retail the same way the old royal dress is. It was a direct nod to her heritage, designed by a Filipino artist, tied specifically to her identity. So when fans look at the new blue US Open dress and start asking whether this is theirs the way the sampaguita pieces were theirs, they're not being naive. They're asking a completely reasonable question. Is this the beginning of something bigger? A real, dedicated Eala line down the road? Or is this simply a well-timed, generically designed dress that a marketing team is smart enough to let a country's imagination run wild with? Nobody outside of Nike's own offices actually knows the answer to that yet. And that uncertainty, whether Nike intends it or not, is part of what's keeping this story alive online right now. The receipts. Why this isn't just marketing hype. Let's pump the brakes on the cynicism for a second, though, because there's a real risk of this turning into a story that's only about branding. It isn't. And here's why. Marketing can put a dress on a hanger. Marketing cannot manufacture 5 straight wins over tour-level opponents. What Eala did at the DC Open, beating Zhang, Fernandez, Svitolina, and Osaka en route to the final, then closing it out against a top 3 seed, pushed her tally of wins over top 10 opponents into the high single digits for the season, tying her among the tour leaders in that category for the year. This is someone who has now beaten multiple Grand Slam champions and top-ranked players across the season, not someone riding a single lucky bracket. And this isn't a one-tournament flash either. Rewind further and you'll find a season-long trajectory. She reached the 4th round of Wimbledon this summer, beating the defending champion along the way, her best Grand Slam result to date. She won a WTA 125 title in Birmingham on grass. She made deep runs in Berlin and Miami earlier in the year, picking off top 10 wins in both. She entered the year ranked well outside the top 100 and has spent the better part of 12 months climbing, tournament by tournament, into a career-high spot inside the world's top 20. That is not a marketing invention. That is a career build, brick by brick, match by match, in full public view. Nike didn't create this story. Nike found it already happening and decided to stand next to it. The history she's actually chasing. Here's where the stakes get bigger than any single dress or any single tournament, and it's the part of the story that gives it real emotional weight. The Philippines is a country with essentially no modern history at the top of professional tennis. The nation's best-ever Grand Slam result belongs to Felicissimo Ampon, who reached the quarterfinals at the French Championships back in the early 1950s, over 70 years ago. In the decades since, no Filipino player, man or woman, had come especially close to matching that until this year, when Eala's run to the fourth round at Wimbledon quietly put her closer to that 70-year-old benchmark than anyone in generations. So when people say this feels bigger than tennis, that's not an exaggeration for clicks. It's the literal truth. An entire country has been waiting the better part of a century for a moment like this one, and it's finally happening in real time, on hard courts across North America, in front of packed stands increasingly filled with Filipino flags. A scene that's become common at her matches this summer, from Toronto to Washington. The split reaction online and why both sides are right. Now, not everyone is uncritically celebrating the dress, and that's actually worth talking about honestly, because pretending the reaction has been unanimous would be dishonest. On tennis discussion boards, the response has been split. A meaningful chunk of fans are pointing out, correctly, that the dress is a shared design from a wider collection, and that Nike is essentially using Eala's momentum to market a piece other athletes will also wear. Meanwhile, on Filipino social media specifically, the dominant read leans hard into the flag color symbolism, treating the release as something closer to a national uniform than a retail product. Here's the thing, both of those readings are true at the same time. It genuinely is a shared commercial design, and it genuinely has become, through the sheer force of collective meaning-making, something that functions like a flag for a huge number of people. Companies sell products. Audiences decide what those products mean. We've watched this exact process happen before with other athletes who started as sponsored faces and ended up becoming something closer to cultural symbols. What's unusual here is how fast it's happening, and how openly the ambiguity is being discussed in real time, instead of being smoothed over after the fact. The part almost nobody is talking about. And now, here's the twist I promised you at the start of this video, the part of the story that got almost completely buried under all the dress excitement. Because while all of this was unfolding, Eala kept playing tennis. And 2 days ago, in the round of 16 at the Canadian Open in Toronto, her 7-match winning streak came to an end. She lost to 12th seed Belinda Bencic, 6-4 in the first set, and then was completely shut out 6-love in the second. It was a lopsided result, and it followed a physically brutal stretch, a title run in Washington, then a grueling third-set battle just to reach that round of 16 match, one in which she had visibly battled discomfort in her foot after a fall on court. Read that stretch back for a second. A title, then match after match, deep into 3 sets multiple times, across back-to-back tournaments, in barely a week and a half. 21 years old. And then, finally, a wall. This is the part of the story that dress announcements conveniently leave out. Fatigue is real. Bodies have limits, even when the wins keep piling up. And instead of hiding from it, Eala addressed it head-on afterward, acknowledging how physically demanding the stretch had been. It's a completely human moment sitting right next to a viral marketing moment, and almost nobody talking about the dress online this week is talking about it. But here's why that loss actually raises the stakes on everything else in this story, rather than deflating it. Because she doesn't get to rest. She heads next to Cincinnati for her debut at that WTA 1000 event. And after that comes the moment this entire dress narrative has been building toward: New York, Arthur Ashe Stadium, the US Open, starting August 23rd. That's the moment she'll actually walk out in the old royal dress, in front of the biggest broadcast audience of her career, carrying a nation's expectations into a tournament against a murderer's row of the best players alive. while still working through the physical toll of the summer she's just had. So what does the dress actually mean? Let's land the plane here, because I think the honest answer is more interesting than either extreme. Strictly speaking, this dress is not a custom, personalized signature line the way the word has been thrown around online. It's a shared design from a wider Nike collection, and other athletes are wearing pieces cut from the same cloth, sometimes literally. There's no personal logo stitched into the collar. No dedicated product line with her name on it, at least not yet. But meaning has never actually lived on a product tag. It lives in who wears something, at what moment in their life, in front of which audience, carrying whose hopes on their shoulders. And what Eala represents, walking onto a hard court in old royal blue in a few weeks, is proof that a country long absent from the top levels of the sport finally has a seat at the table. The Sampaguita hair tie was the quiet, private version of that promise. The Washington Trophy was the public proof. This dress, whether Nike intended it this way or not, has become the televised version broadcast into millions of homes at once. Whether it sells out on release day matters a lot less than what happens when she's actually wearing it on court under pressure, at the tournament that will decide how this entire chapter of her career gets remembered. Ampon's 70-year-old benchmark is still standing. The Canadian Open loss is still fresh. And the biggest stage of her career so far is now just over a week away. If you want to actually follow what happens next, not just the highlight clips, but the full story as it unfolds, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because whatever the tag on that dress says, the dress was never really the story.